What's up, guys? Rick from DFS On Demand here with something a little bit different. I sent up the bat signal a couple of weeks ago and asked for some ideas around fantasy golf formats that might be a little bit different outside the scope of DraftKings specifically. I had a few brewing around in my mind. You guys sent me a couple of pools or some formats of things that you play yourself, and this podcast is really just an opportunity to talk through them, pros and cons. Maybe if there's a format that we like in here, I'll set it up for next year. We can all throw in $10 or something like that and play through it. Just some ways to kind of innovate and keep things going. So this is going to be an audio only. So if you're watching on YouTube, I'm just going to cut to the logo. Feel free to minimize and, just open up your ears because we're just going to go straight audio for this one. All right, catch you on the other side. All right, so fantasy golf formats. This is certainly not a knock on anything daily wise. I think this is just either a way to enhance that or just a way to get kind of a little more action, make some more decisions. I think if you guys follow along with me, I like the challenge of taking contests or pools, trying to find the best way to beat them and sharing that with everyone, with the community, and seeing, like I said, what comes out the other side. There's a lot of pools that go around. I know personally that, they pop up for the majors or things like that. And I was really just trying to think of different ways that we could engage over the course of the next 12 months. And if there's any contest that we might want to start up and roll with. So, the normal ones, we're not going to talk like the one and done. Gup's Corner does such a great job with the one and done. I've kind of been poking them a little bit to make some other version of the one and done where you can get in, later. If you miss the January deadline, you're kind of SOL, you're out of luck, and I think it would be cool if you'd be able to get in throughout the year. So I've been poking the guys on that. But we'll see. But I won't really talk about that. I kind of want to step outside of it. And first things first, there seems to be a gap in the market around kind of like season-long fantasy golf, right? I know it's not the sexiest thing in the world. It's a really long season, but you could start it in January. You could run it through the Tour Championship. But you could essentially run your fantasy golf league just like your fantasy football league, right? You could have 10 teams. You could have something like 8-man rosters where you're able to draft golfers. There's a waiver wire for, after the US Open, you could have been able to pick up Matt Wolff, for example, or Victor Hovland. You could have trades, all that good stuff, and play head to head every single week through the Tour Championship. I think that could be really fun. Your starting lineups could be 4 golfers for each week. In theory, you probably have 4 guys that are going to play on a given week, or maybe it's only 3. Who knows? We could figure something like that out. And then to make it easy, you could just use DraftKings scoring, right? So I play my 3 guys versus your 3 guys. Whoever has the most come Sunday gets the win, and that goes into their standings. I think that could be a really fun aspect and way to kind of take an already successful fantasy football model or fantasy baseball or a basketball model, whatever it might be, and just translate it right into fantasy golf. The cons of that is you're kind of just stuck in your 10-man league, or 12-man, 12 teams, whatever you want to do. It would probably be more fun if some of these contests or some of these opportunities were for larger groups, right? We could get 100 or 1,000 people into it. But just throwing that out there, if anyone's interested, if we want to start up a league like that, maybe I could run it. We'd have to see what the logistics of it are as far as how we'd make waiver claims and stuff like that. But I think it's a challenge that is interesting. Aside from the weekly transaction part, obviously best ball contests in football are very popular right now. So if you're unfamiliar with how best ball drafts work in the NFL, you basically only do the most fun part of the NFL fantasy football season, which is the draft. So at the beginning of the year, you pick like a huge roster, right? Your roster might have 20 guys on it. And then you do not make any transactions throughout the year. You basically there's no waiver, there's no setting your lineup, there's nothing. Each week, it takes your best score available to you. So each week you have to play a quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, for example, but I have 6 wide receivers on my team. It will just automatically give me the score of my 2 highest scoring wide receivers. So I don't even need to set a lineup. There's no trades. There's no waiver pickups. There's nothing. It is just kind of before the season speculation and how that plays out on a weekly basis. You need to consider bye weeks and upside of players and young guys and things like that. So the way that could translate to fantasy golf is very, very similar. You just fill out a roster of, who knows, maybe it's 8, 10 guys before the season starts. And obviously they're not all going to play every tournament. So we take the top, say, 3 scores, and I would probably have to use either DraftKings points or money earned for the scoring system here. And you'd get credit for that each week. You never have to check. You never have to set your lineups. You never have to remember to do it. There's no trades. There's no drops. There's nothing. You just go out and get everybody before the season. So that is one way to do it. Now, the funny thing is here, I actually mentioned that best ball idea on I think I mentioned it on Twitter, and that what I just described was the way that I was thinking about it. And I got an email from Chris, and his Twitter handle, I believe, is BQN Pro Shop. I believe that is his Twitter handle. He actually sent me, he said, "Hey man, I did the best ball format that you mentioned, and here are the results." And I'm looking through and I'm like, what is this guy talking about? This is not remotely at all what I was thinking. And what Chris did with his friends is they actually each drafted golfers, and they kept the hole by hole scoring and took the best score for each hole. It's almost as if you so this is what he did. So he has 4 guys on his team. In this example, it was Webb Simpson, Lucas Glover, Jordan Spieth, and Patrick Reed. Well, if one of them makes a 3 and the others make a 4, you took the 3 as your score for that hole. So it was almost as if you were playing an actual best ball with your friends in a foursome. That is how they scored this. So it's a lot more work because you have to do the hole by hole scoring for everybody. But it ended up being really cool because they shot, like, for example, this is from the Open Championship. His best ball, they were like 11 under. They shot a 60 on the par 71 for round 1, which is really cool. And he was kind of describing it, and it seems like him and his buddies got a pretty good kick out of it. And I was like, wow, that's a lot of work, and it's pretty interesting. And a lot of fun. It's pretty random too. I feel like this is a format that you could get really lucky or get really unlucky. You could have guys that make, a bunch of birdies, but if they all make them on the same holes, you're not necessarily like profiting or taking advantage of all of those birdies. So there's some ways to get really lucky. There's some ways to get really unlucky, which I think is good for the variance of it. So that in my eyes is kind of a weekly game or a weekly format. This other one that I've kind of been thinking about it, and I've actually considered setting this up for a visual, just like I have on my site, where I want to do something with the 3 balls, with the groups that go out each week. So this is what I was kind of thinking. And this could be a big pool. This could almost be like a DraftKings contest, quite honestly. It could almost be a tiers contest, where I will designate before the tournament starts basically 8 different threesomes. So 25 or 24 golfers, and it would be based on the guys that are actually playing together in a group. So if Rory, Tiger, and DJ are in a group, have the same tee time on Thursday, you would have to choose one of those golfers. And then you go down to the next 3 ball. And the next 3 ball might be Bryson, Rose, and Brooks. You have to pick one of those guys. And then you go down. And it would not all be, what I would do is, if you have 8 groups, we'd pick 4 from the morning and 4 from the afternoon wave so that you always have something to watch. And then what we would also do is we'd spread them out, right? It wouldn't just be all the studs. You'd have some studs at the top. And then, your last 3 ball might be, Sepp Straka, Justin Harding, and Nate Lashley. And you've got to pick one of those guys. So it really just is, it's a tiers format, but it uses the tee times and the actual groups of playing partners that these guys are going to be in, and kind of spreads it out throughout the day and makes it a little more interesting. That would be fairly easy to put together. So if this one is clicking for you, give me a holler, because we would just probably use just DraftKings scoring for it, and it would be relatively easy to keep track of. So I could probably whip up a visual, and we could do it on a weekly basis, right? Everybody throws in a couple bucks each week, and see what happens. So that one I think we could absolutely do. And then the one that kind of has me, I've been chewing on for a while, and you'll notice the trend here is I'm trying to take already existing formats in the fantasy world that exist and putting a fantasy golf spin on them. And there is no better sports format than the bracket, the March Madness bracket. And what we could do is essentially run a head-to-head bracket for a series of like 7 or 8 tournaments in a row. So here's what I envision. We would do this World Cup style, or I guess actually we would do it the same way the PGA Tour does their WGC match play down in Austin, where you are in a pod. You're in a group of, there's 4 of you. So 1 week, for the first 3 weeks, you would play your other 3 opponents. And you can do this a couple ways. So maybe you enter a DraftKings lineup. I actually kind of think it would be interesting to do it almost like a one and done format. So you pick one golfer, I pick one golfer. And we'll each have a backup in case we pick the same golfer. And if he earns $1.2 million, that's how many points you get. And then the next week you play another owner in your pod. And whatever golfer I chose in week 1, I can't choose ever again. Okay, so now I use DJ in week 1, I have to use Rory in week 2, and I get $50,000. So now I've got, 1.25 million, and I go to my third matchup and do the same thing, and I can't pick any of the first 2 golfers. So after that, you would have the winner of your pod would advance, and then it would go to single elimination. And if you have like 64 guys, I think it's 7 weeks it would take to get down to the finish. So the pros and cons for this are, I think there's a lot of strategy involved with it being kind of one and done, where you can't use the same golfer, or maybe you have to pick 2 golfers and then you can't use those 2. Like, we can figure out a format. Maybe you pick 3, and then by the end of it, you've burned through a ton of guys. The cons are, there's only so many owners that can be involved, 64, 128, something like that. And if you don't make it out of your pod, you only got 3 weeks worth of action. Now, if you do the pod style, it's not single elimination, so at least you got 3 weeks of it. But you kind of lose interest from guys quickly if they're not advancing all the way to the finals or all the way through the first couple stages. I think it would be fun. I think it would be cool to kind of crown somebody as the champion in that format. And I think if you did get into the payouts of it, you could make a pretty good return in just 7 or 8 weeks or whatever it ends up being, with just fairly little effort, and it would be pretty easy to track. So that is something that is available. Again, I'd be willing to track that if you guys are interested. We have to figure out a good way to do it. I'd probably want there to be a little bit more strategy, like you have to pick 2 or 3 golfers every single week. That way it limits the amount of golfers that you have overlapping with each other. And then also, if you do make it to the finals, you're basically stuck playing, well, I guess if you had like 7 weeks in a row, 3 golfers, you're playing like, golfers 25 through 30, which is kind of, if you make 30 picks in a one and done over the course of the season, that's kind of the player pool that you're getting into. So I think that could be a really fun format. Those are the ideas that I had off the top, taking already existing formats and try to put a twist on them. If you guys like any of those and we can figure out a way to run it, let me know. I'll do my best to get it up and running if there's a lot of interest. So tweet me. It's at DFS On Demand. Leave a comment here on YouTube if you're interested. Or if there are other formats, the point of this is also to kind of open this up. If there are other formats, we've got time, right? So we can start this for the swing season or in January. So we have time, but let's get flesh out all the different options for contests and for polls and for formats, and we'll go from there. Should be something fun. All right, tweet me at DFS on demand. Leave a comment below. Later.